Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm actually going to be shifting a little bit this way because I've got a stack of books right here that I don't want to knock off. This is an exciting video today. Let me backtrack. Hi, my name is Alana. This is my booktube. We talk about books. We review books in long format. Today's video is going to be one that I have been preparing this list for about a month, musing over it, pondering it. My current top 10 favorite classics. And so last year, when I first started my channel, I posted my top 10 favorite books of all time. That would have been as of the end of 2021. This year, I just going into when I figured, let's backtrack. And then I was like, it would be interesting to see how the list changes over time as I continue to read more books. Sometimes you reread books that didn't stick out at one point in your life, and then you read them later in life, and then they become favorites, whatever. And so this year, however, I wanted to switch it up. I'm going to keep two different lists: my top 10 favorite classics and my top 10 favorite contemporary reads. And the reason why I'm doing this is because if I were to just do my top 10, it would always be dominated by the classics, and it would not allow me to showcase the contemporary books that I have read that I think are stellar, because it would always be dominated by the classics with maybe one or two exceptions. So that's why I'm doing it this way. And this was fairly easy for me to do for the classics anyway, because I kind of already know it. I don't really think that it's shifted too much. If you go back, and I'll link that video below so you can see what the top 10 were as of the end of 2021. And so there are a few new ones up here just because I read one of them in 2022. And then because I've only focusing on classics in this book, it's allowing me to shout out a couple of books that may not have been on the previous year's list. These books are books that I have read up to the end of 2022. So this does not include any 2023 books, which it couldn't, because I'm recording this, we're halfway through January. So this is as of the end of 2022. This is in no particular order. I am going to start here. That's on this table stacked up, because this is precarious. This is a book I have never talked about on this channel, and I have not talked about in a long time on my Instagram. I read it in 2019 for the first time. Ooh, this is a chunker. Ooh, it's so satisfying to hold. The Priory by Dorothy Whipple. This book, I read it in 2019 in November. So good. Oh, Dorothy Whipple is such a hidden gem. She's everything she that I have read from her thus far is just, she needs a spotlight. The Priory is the first novel that I've read from her. Persephone has published all of her novels, Persephone classics, Persephone books. And The Priory, again, I'm basing this off my 2019 knowledge, excuse me, but The Priory is about two young women, coming of age, and then they live in this nice old English countryside house. It has staff, but they're kind of, their mother has passed. The father is kind of a distant parent. It's also right before World War II, so you're in that interwar period in England between World War I and World War II. And these sisters, as they're growing up, they marry two different types of men, and they make very different choices in marriage. And this book is kind of chronicling pre-marriage, the falling in love stage, post-marriage, or as far as post-marriage, or, getting to actually be in the reality of marriage, then leading up into World War II, right before World War II. And you see these tensions that develop between the sisters. You see these tensions that develop between their spouses and other family members. And you do get some stories. There's some side stories with some of I forget her name, but there is one lady who is young woman who's a staff at this house. I think she's a maid or something. And you get one of her stories with her relationship. It is a quiet novel but it is immaculate. It's just, Dorothy Whipple has a way, she's a very subtle writer. She's quite blunt. She's not super flowery, but she still is just, she's got that something that is, you can't put your finger on it. She's a gifted writer. And the beginning of this novel has one of my favorite openings in a novel. It's so cozy. I'm even going to read it because it's one paragraph, but it is gorgeously written. And the ending, all of these books, actually, if it's made into my top 10, the likelihood that I had some type of emotional response to this novel is quite high. And if I get an emotional response out of a book, it's an automatic 5 because that's very difficult for me to do. I'm not a very emotional reader. That doesn't mean I don't feel while I'm reading, but I'm a very difficult person to make misty-eyed. And so this book at the end, as you see this, there's a reconciliation that starts to happen between some of these characters. And Dorothy Whipple, I've noticed this in her novels, she will bring her characters to the brink of just breakdown, where everything around them is falling apart. And I don't know much about Dorothy Whipple's, there's not really that much that's known about her. She's long since passed. But I wondered if she was a woman of faith, because in every novel I've read from her so far, her characters get to this brink of breaking down, and then the only thing that they have left to rely on is their faith, and they have an actual coming to Jesus moment where the only thing that they can do is pray. And those are some of the most raw, poignantly written, and heart-wrenching passages in literature that I have read. They're very authentic. And there is a moment like this in this book, and it is heartbreaking, but it's heartwarming at the same time. That, it stuck with me. It sticks with me. It happens in another book by Someone at a Distance. This character just can't take it anymore. She's done with life. All she can do is get on her knees and pray. This book is immaculate. I need to reread this book. I have had it sitting out here because I think I might try to reread this book this year. I might have it as a bedside read. So yeah, enough raving. I have 9 other books to get through. No surprise. J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. I have The Fellowship of the Ring here, but I am including all of the series, including The Hobbit, as one piece of work. I have recently posted a video review of this book. And what else is there to say? Lord of the Rings is iconic. I think The Fellowship of the Ring might be my favorite of the 3, but it's got some of my favorite characters in literature, period. I love J.R.R. Tolkien's gentle wisdom that he puts in these books and good advice. There's something cozy about these books. These books now for me just reek of nostalgia. I mean, I've been interacting with The Lord of the Rings for 20 years now at this point, and these books are very special to me. The story is very special to me because I became engrossed in it when the movies were first coming out in theaters. There were waves when this book became popular. When these books were popular, my dad remembers in his generation when they became popular. Yes, they were published in the 50s. My dad remembers when they were popular. So, it's like in a lot of ways they were the Harry Potter before Harry Potter. And so these books are just very special to me. I don't think I need to give these books much of an introduction. Aragorn is also my favorite male character of all time, with Jamie Fraser from Outlander being a very close second. But I'm not even going to rave about this anymore. It's Lord of the Rings. I say Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is enough. Where am I going to put this? Let's put this right here. I have a box down here. Okay. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, which some people have tried to take out of schools recently because it uses slurs. It's the South during segregation. Yeah, Okay. Irrelevant. Not irrelevant. Okay. This book I've read twice at this point. And there are no annotation tabs in this book, but this book is annotated. I need to reread it and then go retab it. There was a period of time when I first started annotating. I would annotate and then I would like take the tabs out. I don't know what I was thinking. That was when I was still a little nervous to write in my books, and I would write in pencil. Now I mark all over my stuff. But To Kill a Mockingbird, again, a book that I don't really think needs an introduction. You've got taking place in the 1960s. Is it taking place in the 1960s? It was published in the 1960s. Do we know when this book is actually taking place? Is there a date that's ever given? I've read this book twice. I should know this. Irrelevant. So this is taking place in Alabama. That's the deep south of the United States. And so you've got these racial segregation, racial tensions, and it's seen through the lens of Scout and her brother. And to see these interactions and to see this court case of this young black man who was accused of a crime through the eyes and the innocence of children, while they're still dealing with regular, sibling tensions and going to school and all, it's just excellent. It's well written. There's some phenomenal quotes in this book. This is a book that I think everybody should read at least once. To Kill a Mockingbird is stellar. I don't think I'm going to try to keep my synopses on these books very, very short, but this is a book that every time I read it, again, I've only read it twice, but the second time I read it, I was like, oh yeah, solidified. One of my favorite books of all time. I think this is a must read. I'm just gonna, you know me, I just throw myself on the floor. No books were harmed in the making of these videos. Ross Poldark by Winston Graham. The Poldark books, I would say, after Lord of the Rings, may be one of my favorite series ever. So I came to the Poldark books after being introduced to the show, which is one of my favorite shows of all time. It's actually one of my favorite pieces of television, cinema, whatever, period. Especially the first 4 seasons. The fifth season heavily deviates from the book and becomes more like fan fiction. Then none of that happens in these stories. But this is a series of 12 books. I am currently, as of the recording of this video, making my way through the 12th book, and I spaced it out over the period of 3 years because I wanted to savor them. But my favorite book out of the 12, and they are all immaculate, is the first one. I have something about the first of a series. There's just something extra special, I think, about the first book of many series. Is that just me? What? So Ross Poldark is about this young man, Ross, who comes back. He's a bit of a rake, actually, before he served as a British soldier in the American Revolution. He was just kind of wayward, getting into trouble. He gambled. He's a bit wayward. And so he gets into some trouble, and it's either get into some serious trouble, or you can pay your crime, you can pay your penance by serving in the Revolutionary War. So he comes back from war, and his land is, he's of the gentry, he's of the upper class, but his father has passed away. The girl that he was in love with, because his family hadn't heard of him, his surviving family, his cousins, his aunt, his uncle, even the girl that he was in love with, Elizabeth, they haven't heard from him in 3 years. They thought he died in the war. He died on the battlefield of Virginia. And when he unexpectedly shows back up, his boo thing is engaged to his cousin. Okay? And then his family owns mines. The mine ain't kicking. My brother Poe, he's rich in social class, but he Poe in coin. So anyway, this book in particular is about Ross putting back the pieces of his life. And in doing so, he employs a young kitchen maid named Demelza. And over the years, this book spans way more years than a television show, because a TV show just doesn't have the space and time to do that. They're going to have to accelerate some things, but they end up getting married. And he doesn't love her at first. He likes her, but he doesn't love her at first. She's always kind of been enamored by this handsome young rake. And so you see how these two people mold each other over the years throughout the whole series. and it goes on into the storylines of their children and Ross's rival George and what happens with the woman that he initially loved first and all this other stuff. It is drama, but these are cozy books, but they're also sad in places, really funny in places. It spans decades. We have it deals with the Napoleonic Wars. So we deal with just various political upheavals. But the first book is extra special and immaculately written. And so I am going to try to reread this book this year. I first read it in 2020 and actually annotated it because I went through all these books at first through audio because the narrator is immaculate. I keep saying immaculate, but the narrator is prime. So this is just one of my favorite stories of all time. I will never get enough of Ross and Demelza. I will say, I just finished the 11th book, the 11 out of the 12, as of this video about a week ago. And again, like I said, I'm not an emotional reader. That book was so sad, but the second best book in the series after the first one. And there's a section in this book towards the end where I got a little misty-eyed. It was just so beautifully written. Moving forward, another book I need to reread, but that has always kind of left an impression on me since I read it. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. We have this young girl, Frances, who, her name is Frances, right? I told you it's been a couple years. Yeah, Francie. I was right on it. Francie, who, she's a daughter of immigrants. Her father in particular is Irish American. I believe her mother's Irish as well. Irish American. They're living in New York City. This is the 1930s, 40s. And so we're definitely going to get some World War II in here. But as a woman, she's on the home front of the war. And it's a coming of age story. And Francie loves to read. She loves to write. She wants to be a writer. And it's just a coming of age story of her life as an Irish American in New York City during the mid 20th century, leading up to World War II. And it ends when she's 18 years old. And the ending, it comes back full circle from the beginning of the book. This book, it's a gentle novel. Yes, there's some sad things here and there, but it's one of those cozy reads. A lot of people say there's nothing that happens in this book. I'm like, it is a slice of life novel. I think it's one of those American classics that should be read, especially if you're a person who likes books about people who like books. And there are also some really funny instances in this book that were laugh out loud funny to me. Like when Francie and her brother go to pick up the family's Christmas tree that year, and there's just this guy just throwing Christmas trees at people. Hilarious. And what I also liked about this book is that Francie's father is not the best parent. He is not the best husband. And yet the author chooses to treat him in a very respectful and graceful way. I need to reread this book. You can tell it's annotated. Before I had plastic tabs. So I would love to, one, go back through this book, replace the tabs with sturdier tabs, and just re-annotate and see what I pick up the second read around. Yeah, there's just something about this book. And when I was just reading it, again, like I said, it's a cozy book. It's not the fastest paced book, but when you get into it, for me, it was hard to put down. Let's get on with it. I am 19 minutes in. I said I was going to be quick. A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. To date, my favorite Dickens. To date, one of my favorite classics. Can we not say that the beginning of this book is iconic? It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. I first read this book in the beginning of 2020 in February before lockdowns happened. And to then go back after I read this book, when lockdowns first happened in 2020, to read the first paragraph, it was actually a source of comfort. And I kept referring back to that passage throughout the whole of 2020. And Dickens is an author for me that has taken some warming up to. He can be a challenging author, I think, to read. He can be an annoying author to read because he has subplots with subplots. He's wordy And sometimes you don't understand how all of this is going to add up. This is one of those books when I first read it. I wasn't quite sure how everything was going to add up. And then you get to the end. Again, this is taking place of it's the French Revolution. You get to the end, and it is one of the most profound displays of conditional love and friendship that I have ever read in a novel. And again, I had to put the book down. It happens at the last minute. And when you get to that ending, for me, when I got to the ending, it made the whole book a 5. When you saw what Dickens was doing, man. So again, when I got to that, I had to just put the book down and stare at a wall. I was like, did my boy Chuck do what I think he did? Ouch. Punch me in the gut, but it's beautiful. Again, due for a reread, due for some retabbing, but due for a reread. And I, as a knitter, I appreciate this cover. There are knitters in this book, and the knitters are significant. I'm trying to speed myself up. Okay. This should come of no surprise. I recently reviewed this. It was my top read of 2022, The Grapes of Wrath. Again, because I have a very fresh review on this, I'm not going to belabor it, but you have the Jodes, this family from Oklahoma who are this is taking place during the Dust Bowl, taking place during the Great Depression, and they're on their way to California to try to make a better life for themselves. Their house has literally been bulldozed by the corporation / the government. And so they are just trying to just make ends meet. And it is partly a road trip novel with all this drama. It is a sad novel. It's Steinbeck. Come on, it's a sad novel. But the writing is what really sticks out the most when you get to, I think, The Grapes of Wrath. The dialect, the writing, some of the best writing I may have ever read ever. I like to say my guy was a rapper. This book is poignant. The hype, it's worth the hype. This is one of those books, especially on Instagram, that Blue Jay is hollering. Oh, I love it. It's one of the best books I've ever read. I'm like, okay, but is it really? It is. It's one of the best books I've ever read. I would say this was in my top 4 favorite books. If I were to put it into place, it's within the top 4. But classic American fiction at its finest. We're getting into the last 3. Stoner by John Williams. When I first read this book in 2014, I would have given it a 3. I was a very different reader then. I reread it in 2021, I want to say. Yes, I reread it in 2021, and it became a top read, favorite classic. John Williams is so gifted. This is, again, a quiet novel. It is not a cheery novel. It's an existential novel. You have this guy, William Stoner, who was born on a farm, very poor, goes to university, falls in love with English as a subject. Then he becomes a professor. He gets married, he has a child, but his life is just somehow never quite reaches this. There's this tension between the reality of his life and what he's seeing on the outside versus this inner brilliance that's just kind of there but never fully gets kindled, which is what makes it quite existential. And he is John Williams is not a gaudy writer. He's not a flowery writer, but this book it hits different. It's hard to articulate. I do have a review on this buried somewhere on Instagram, but this is a book that I'm going to keep reading over and over again because I still have questions. I just was flipping through my annotations and I was questions like, what does this mean? There are just certain things in this book that you just can't stop musing over, but this is a good one. It's a quiet novel, but it's also a novel about the quiet life and those people who live lives that are not noteworthy. John Williams is shouting out the quiet, mundane life in the most beautiful way possible. with a little bit of existential crisis. I'm all about it. Another book that I have recently reviewed, so I don't even think it needs an introduction, Jane Eyre, which is actually my favorite book of all time. Actually, the last two, this and the last book I'm going to discuss, I would say that if I were to be marooned on an island with 3 books, and these are the only 3 books that I could read ever, over and over again, it would be Jane Eyre, The Grapes of Wrath, and this last book that I'm going to talk about. I have, again, recently reviewed Jane Eyre, the iconic Victorian coming-of-age story of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I don't think it needs an introduction, where you've got her falling in love with Mr. Rochester, but I would argue that this is not a romance. This is, again, a coming-of-age. It's a spiritual awakening for a main character, Jane. Charlotte is an impeccable writer, but it's worth reading alone for the language. And I've read this novel 4 times as of the end of 2022, and it just ages like fine wine. I'd never get sick of Jane. My favorite heroine, my favorite female character in all of literature. And if this has been on your TBR for a long time, what you waiting for? Pick her up. She a chunker. And it's just got, if you like coming of age stories where she also is, it's cold. My girl Jane is always cold. This is a cozy novel. It's gothic. There's things that go bump in the night. There's a bit of a supernatural element to it in some ways. And it's just Gothic Victorian literature at its best. Highly recommend. I have one more book to discuss. I think someone's knocking at the door. Not my problem. The Brothers Karamat by Dostoevsky. Again, if I had to be marooned on an island, this is going to be one of them. You could read this book for the rest of your life and still not pick everything up about it. Look at those tabs. So we have a murder of a father. He has 4 sons. Which one done it? Somebody did it. And so, yes, it's a bit of a murder mystery, but not really, because it's really each brother represents a different philosophy. Religion, atheism, one's more philosophical, one is a bastard brother, and he's real twisted. And so, everything you need to know about life is in this book, which is also a quote from Slaughterhouse-Five. But it's hard to describe this book in a few sentences. It is dense. It is slow going at times. The devil makes an appearance in the most evocative way. This is just, again, a book I need to reread. You get these debates between religion and atheism, good versus evil, fatherhood, parenthood, and how that really correlates with the state of Russia and Mother Russia at the time. So, yeah, highly recommend. One of my favorites. I can't sum up the Brothers Karamat in 2 sentences in 3 minutes, but I do my best. Right. That was dramatic. Have you read any of these books or any of these books on your TBR? If you've been following me for a while, either on Instagram or YouTube, none of these books should really be that much of a surprise. Maybe something like The Priory, because I haven't talked about that book since 2019. But what are your favorite classics? Have you now become interested in reading some of my favorites? If so, let me know. And feel free to like, subscribe, leave me a comment. Feel free to follow me on the Instagrams, where I'm always up to more bookish shenanigans. And I will see you in the next one.